Hey there, this is Alexis Knight. Welcome to True Crime, the Court of Public Opinion. In this edition of Mad or Bad, we're going to get into a case where the line between criminal intent and mental instability blurs. This case takes us to the quiet city of Vallejo, California, where a horrifying kidnapping unfolded, leaving a community shaken and a courtroom divided. Let me set the scene for you. It's the early hours of March 23rd in 2015, and Denise Huskins and her boyfriend Aaron Quinn are fast asleep in their home. And suddenly, they're awakened by the chilling sound of a masked intruder breaking in. Armed and demanding compliance, he separates the couple, binding Aaron and taking Denise away in the night. Over the next 2 days, Vallejo police received cryptic messages and ransom demands. But when Denise is released unharmed, the story takes a strange twist. Authorities accuse the couple of staging the entire event. But were they truly lying, or had they fallen victim to something much darker? This case explodes into the headlines, and not just because of its bizarre details, but because of the man behind it all, Matthew Muller. This is a Harvard-educated lawyer. Muller, he was far from the typical criminal. His background was pristine, his credentials impeccable, yet beneath the surface lay a mind unraveling under the weight of mental illness. Was he a calculated predator? Or was his psychosis the real predator? That is the question we are exploring in this episode. So stay with me as we uncover the chilling details of this crime, the investigation that followed, and the complex question of whether Muller's actions were those of a madman or something far worse. Imagine you're Denise Huskins. You've had a normal day, you've gone to bed, and now you find yourself blindfolded, bound, and terrified. A masked man is stormed into your home and taken you. Aaron's left behind, zip-tied and helpless. His pleas to protect you go unanswered. The man claims to be part of a group orchestrating the abduction, providing bizarre instructions and demands. As authorities begin their investigation, they quickly grow suspicious of the couple's story. Why was Denise released unharmed after 2 days? Why do certain details sound too bizarre to be true? Police, skeptical from the start, label it as a girl gone hoax, tarnishing Denise and Aaron's credibility. But as the case unravels, disturbing truths emerge. Evidence begins to point to Matthew Muller, a man whose life trajectory spiraled from Harvard law to homelessness, paranoia, and eventually crime. His capture opens the door to a chilling exploration of a man who seemed to have it all, but lost himself to mental illness. Now, if this story sounds familiar, it's probably because it's featured on the Netflix docuseries American Nightmare. The series brought the horrifying events of Denise Huskins' kidnapping into the spotlight, showcasing the mishandling by law enforcement and the shocking truth behind the crime. But while Netflix unraveled the basic facts, they didn't quite get into all the twists and turns. And that's what we're doing here today. We're going to dive into the layers of this case and the disturbing mind of Matthew Muller, the man behind it all. So let's rewind to March 2015. Vallejo, California, it's not a city you'd associate with a Hollywood-level plot. But on that fateful night, it became the backdrop for a story stranger than fiction. Denise Huskins and her boyfriend Aaron Quinn were in their home when a masked intruder broke in. Armed with a stun gun and equipped with night vision goggles, he seemed prepared for anything. He tied up Aaron, forced him to drink a sedative, and kidnapped Denise, leaving behind cryptic instructions and a chilling sense of dread. And for 2 days, Denise was held captive in an undisclosed location while her abductor emailed ransom demands to the police. Then, as suddenly as she'd been taken, Denise was released, unharmed, near her family's home in Huntington Beach. But instead of being treated as victims, both Denise and Aaron were accused of fabricating the entire ordeal. Police claimed it was an elaborate hoax, a real-life gone girl, and their lives were turned upside down. But as we now know, this was not a hoax. Evidence eventually led to Matthew Muller, a man whose life was a patchwork of brilliance and brokenness. A Harvard-educated attorney turned serial offender. Muller had a history of delusions and paranoia, culminating in crimes that shocked even seasoned investigators. While American Nightmare highlighted the public and personal fallout of this case, we're going to peel back the layers to uncover the deeper questions. Who was Matthew Muller? What drove him to commit such a calculated crime? And how do we reconcile his brilliance with the darkness that ended up consuming him? Okay, well, the night of the kidnapping, everything seemed meticulously planned. The intruder, later identified, as I said, as Matthew Muller, wasn't some opportunistic criminal. This guy came prepared, armed with a stun gun, duct tape, zip ties, and even night vision goggles. His actions suggested a frightening level of forethought. Muller didn't just break into Denise and Aaron's home. He infiltrated their lives in a way that would leave permanent scars. The attack began in the dead of night. Muller forced Aaron to bind himself with zip ties before the sedatives, and then as Aaron lay incapacitated, Muller focused on Denise. Blindfolded and bound, she was dragged from her home into a waiting car. Now, for Aaron, the hours that followed were agonizing. He managed to wake up more, free himself, but his attempts to contact police were met with skepticism. These officers were already doubting his story. They were implying that something wasn't adding up. Now, meanwhile, Denise, she's being held in captivity. She's being subjected to Muller's erratic behavior. He spoke of being part of an elite group conducting high-stakes kidnappings. This is a claim as bizarre as it was terrifying. In over 2 days, Muller continued his charade, sending cryptic emails to the police, complete with ransom demands. His communications were calculated to add confusion and misdirect authorities. And then, almost as suddenly as it began, it was all over. Denise was released near her family's home, and she was unharmed, but she was deeply shaken. You might think her release would have marked the beginning of justice, but instead, this whole thing set off a new nightmare. Authorities dismiss the couple's claims, and they call it a hoax, and then they accuse them of wasting police resources. The media dubbed Denise the Gone Girl, referencing the fictional thriller where a woman fakes her disappearance to frame her husband. For Denise and Aaron, this ordeal turned from survival to vindication. It wasn't until months later that the pieces began to fall into place. A break-in at another home, eerily similar to the Vallejo kidnapping, finally led investigators to Matthew Muller. Inside his car, they found critical evidence: Denise's laptop, duct tape, zip ties, tools that matched those used in the kidnapping. And then suddenly, the wild claims Denise and Aaron made, they didn't seem so far-fetched. Muller's arrest marked a turning point in the case, but it also revealed a deeply troubling picture of the man himself. A Harvard-educated attorney, a former Marine, a successful professional. Muller's life appeared enviable on the surface, but behind the facade was a history of mental illness, including bipolar disorder and psychosis. His mental state, combined with his criminal behavior, posed a difficult question for the justice system. Was Muller a criminal mastermind, or was he a man whose life was overtaken by delusions and paranoia? When investigators began to piece together the details of Matthew Muller's crimes, the story took an even darker turn. Muller wasn't just a one-time offender. This guy had a history of similar incidents. Previous reports linked him to home invasions in the Bay Area, many of which involved tactics similar to those used in Denise's kidnapping. Night vision goggles, zip ties, and duct tape became a pattern, a signature even. The methodical nature of these crimes painted the picture of a highly intelligent, yet deeply disturbed individual. During his arrest, police uncovered damning evidence inside Muller's home. And in addition to Denise's laptop and other physical items from the crime, there were detailed notes about his plans and surveillance of potential victims. This wasn't random. It was calculated. Muller had spent months preparing, stalking, and rehearsing his actions. For investigators, it was chilling to think how many more people he might have targeted had he not been caught. But perhaps the most alarming discovery was Muller's state of mind. Despite the overwhelming evidence, his behavior was erratic. He vacillated between lucid moments and paranoid ramblings, claiming to be part of a shadowy organization orchestrating high-stakes crimes. His delusions were so vivid that at times even seasoned investigators and detectives wondered if there was a sliver of truth to his bizarre claims. However, as more evidence came to light, it became clear that Muller wasn't part of a larger network. His mind was simply fractured. For Denise and Aaron, this revelation was bittersweet. It proved their innocence, vindicating them after months of being vilified. But it also brought a new wave of pain. The media's initial portrayal of them as liars had left scars that wouldn't heal easily. They would no longer be just victims of a crime. They were now victims of a system that failed to even believe them. Matthew Muller's trial wasn't just about proving guilt. It was about understanding the role his mental illness played in his actions. Diagnosed with bipolar disorder and psychosis years earlier, Muller's mental health had deteriorated significantly by the time of this kidnapping. His attorneys argued that his delusions and paranoia drove his behavior, rendering him incapable of fully understanding the consequences of his actions. But here is where the debate intensifies. How much should mental illness influence criminal responsibility? On one hand, Muller's diagnosis painted a picture of a man whose grasp on reality was tenuous at best. His delusions weren't fabricated for legal defense. They were well documented by medical professionals over the years. Now, on the other hand, the meticulous planning of the crime suggested a level of control and intent that contradicted the idea of diminished responsibility. Prosecutors leaned into this contradiction, arguing that Muller's intelligence and premeditation made him fully accountable for his actions. They pointed to his Harvard education and legal background, emphasizing that he knew the difference between right and wrong. Defense attorneys, however, countered with a simple question. Can someone truly understand the morality of their actions when their mind is consumed by paranoia and delusion? This is not the first case to blur the lines between madness and malice, and it certainly will not be the last. For the jury, the challenge was clear. Balance the evidence of a calculated crime against the undeniable reality of a man battling severe mental illness. In the end, Muller was found competent to stand trial and pleaded guilty to the kidnapping, receiving a 40-year sentence. But for many, the case left lingering questions about how the justice system handles cases involving mental health. When Matthew Muller finally faced trial, it wasn't just about his guilt or innocence. It was about how the justice system would interpret his actions through the lens of mental illness. Muller pled guilty to the kidnapping of Denise Huskins, avoiding a lengthy trial. But the courtroom proceedings revealed a deeper complexity, as both the prosecution and defense argued about the extent to which Muller's mental health should affect his sentencing. Prosecution portrayed Muller as a dangerous criminal, and they emphasized the meticulous planning that went into his crimes. They pointed to his surveillance of potential victims, his calculated use of technology to misdirect police, and his pattern of similar break-ins. This wasn't the work of a man out of control, the prosecution argued. this was the work of a predator. But on the other hand, the defense presented a picture of a man whose life had unraveled due to severe mental illness. Testimony from psychiatrists and family members painted Muller as someone who struggled for years with bipolar disorder and episodes of psychosis. His delusions, they argued, drove his criminal behavior, and this made him a victim of his own mind as much as his victims were of his actions. Well, the judge ultimately sentenced Muller to 40 years in prison, a decision that seemed to balance the severity of his crimes with the mitigating factor of his mental illness. But the courtroom wasn't the only place where this case played out. For Denise Huskins and Aaron Quinn, the sentencing was a form of closure, but it couldn't erase the trauma they endured, both at the hands of Muller and from the accusations leveled against them. And as Muller was led away in handcuffs, one question lingered. Did the punishment fit the crime, or did it overlook the complexities of his mental state? It's a question that continues to spark debate in legal and mental circles still to this day. While the courtroom drama unfolded, the court of public opinion had its own trial. Initially, Denise Huskins and Aaron Quinn were vilified, their claims dismissed as a girl-gone hoax. The media latched onto this narrative, broadcasting it far and wide without fully even understanding the facts. And for Denise, the experience was doubly painful. She wasn't just a kidnapping victim, she became a symbol of how quickly society can turn on survivors. Even after Muller's conviction, the damage to their reputations lingered, and it took a civil lawsuit against the Vallejo Police Department to fully vindicate Denise and Aaron. They won a $2.5 million settlement, a public acknowledgement of the harm caused by the authorities' mishandling of the case. But even that victory felt bittersweet, because no amount of money can erase what they went through. But it is a good start for them to rebuild their lives. The public's perception of Muller was equally polarized. Some saw him as a calculated criminal who deserved the full weight of the law, and others viewed him as a tragic figure, a man whose mental illness consumed him and turned brilliance into chaos. For mental health advocates, the case highlighted systemic issues in how the justice system handles defendants with severe psychiatric conditions. Because this isn't just a story about a crime, these stories often are not. This is a story about how we as a society view mental illness and accountability. Can someone be both a victim and a villain? Do you think? Can brilliance and madness coexist? And most importantly, where do we draw the line between justice and compassion? And these are the questions that make this case, the case of Matthew Muller, so haunting and so unforgettable. The case of Matthew Muller isn't just about a single crime. It's a lens through which we can examine the intersection of mental health, criminal behavior, and the justice system, which is why we do these cases. At its core, it raises a critical question. How do we balance accountability with compassion for those struggling with severe mental illness? It's a never-ending question, and for Muller, the answer wasn't simple. On one hand, his crime was calculated, and it was terrifying. He meticulously planned the kidnapping, used technology to manipulate the investigation, and showed no immediate signs of remorse. But then on the other hand, his behavior was undeniably shaped by years of untreated mental illness. Diagnosed with bipolar disorder and psychosis, Muller's mental state had deteriorated to the point where delusions dictated his actions. In his mind, he was not a lone criminal. He was a part of a larger imaginary organization. And in that sense, he was doing what he was supposed to do. And this duality makes the case so polarizing, because for legal experts, it highlights the limitations of our justice system in addressing mental health. How do you handle this when the criminal lives inside your mind, but maybe is not you? I mean, the courts are designed to determine guilt or innocence, not to navigate those gray areas of psychological instability. Muller's sentencing, 40 years in federal prison. It was seen by some as just, given the severity of his crimes, but others argued that his mental illness should have been given more weight, potentially leading to treatment in a psychiatric facility instead of incarceration. And the impact of this case, it goes beyond just this criminal here, Muller. I mean, for Denise and Aaron, it was a devastating example of how victims, too, can be further traumatized by the very systems meant to protect them. From the initial skepticism of police to the media's quick embrace of that gone girl hoax narrative, they faced obstacles at every single turn. It wasn't until Muller's arrest and confession that their ordeal was validated, a validation that came too late to prevent the emotional and reputational damage that they were forced to endure. This case also opened a broader conversation about how law enforcement handles unusual crimes. The Vallejo Police Department's mishandling of this investigation, it was a glaring example of bias and how bias clouds judgment. Instead of pursuing every lead, they simply chose to dismiss Denise and Aaron's story outright, leaving the real criminal free to just be out there to strike again. It was only through sheer luck, really, a break-in at another home, that Muller was caught. Now, beyond the courtroom and public opinion, the case also serves as a cautionary tale about mental health. And we talk about it often here. Muller's life trajectory from a Harvard graduate with a promising future to a convicted felon. It shows how untreated mental illness can spiral into disaster. And this is not a unique story. You and I both know this. It is a reminder of the consequences of a system that often fails to provide adequate support for those in need. Mental health professionals who analyzed Muller's case pointed to missed opportunities for intervention. His erratic behavior, paranoia, and delusions were well documented in the years leading up to this kidnapping. Friends and family reported noticing drastic changes in his personality. But like so many others, Muller slipped through the cracks of a fragmented mental health system. By the time he committed his crimes, he was beyond reach. Now, for society, this raises those uncomfortable questions. Because how many Matthew Mullers are out there? You know, the individuals who could be helped if only they had access to the right resources. How many of them will go on to do serious crimes? How do we as a society reconcile the need for public safety with the ethical imperative to treat mental illness as a health issue rather than a criminal one? As we reflect on this case, it is clear that the answers are not simple. Muller's story is both a tragedy and it's a cautionary tale. It's a reminder of the human cost of untreated mental illness and the complexities of balancing justice with compassion. And for the victims, it's a story of resilience, a testament to their strength in the face of unimaginable challenges. And, you know, if this case itself doesn't seem that interesting to you, know that this is not an isolated incident, and I can't reiterate that enough. This is part of a much larger and deeply troubling pattern in our society, the criminalization of mental illness. Let's talk about the numbers. According to the National Alliance on Mental Illness, approximately 1 in 5 in the United States, 1 in 5, guys, that's 20% of our population, experiences mental illness each year. Of those, millions go untreated due to barriers like cost and stigma and lack of access to care. Now, here's where the connection to the criminal justice system becomes so glaring. Studies show that nearly 37% of incarcerated individuals in state and federal prisons have been diagnosed with mental health conditions. In local jails, that number jumps to 44%. This means that people with mental illnesses are disproportionately represented in the prison system, a system that often lacks the resources to provide them with the care they need. Muller's case underscores the devastating consequences of these statistics. This crime didn't need to happen. His untreated bipolar disorder and psychosis weren't just personal struggles, they became public dangers. And while his actions were inexcusable, they highlight a systemic failure that goes beyond him. If Muller had received adequate mental health support earlier in his life, could this crime have been prevented? The answer isn't definitive, I know, but it is a question worth asking. Another statistic to consider: the recidivism rate for individuals with untreated mental illness is significantly higher than for those who receive proper treatment. Without addressing the root cause of their behavior, many individuals leave prison only to reoffend, perpetuating a cycle that benefits no one. Muller's 40-year sentence ensures he won't reoffend, but it doesn't solve the underlying issue. It's a temporary solution to a much deeper problem. And let's not forget the ripple effects. Beyond the criminal, there are victims, people like Denise Huskins and Aaron Quinn, whose lives are now forever altered. The emotional and psychological and financial toll on victims is immeasurable, and it's compounded by the knowledge that systemic failures contributed to their trauma. For Denise and Aaron, justice came too late, and for Muller, it came without the compassion needed to address his underlying illness. So where do we go from here? Experts in mental health and criminal justice agree on one thing: the system needs reform. But haven't we known that for quite a while? One proposed solution, though, is the expansion of mental health courts, specialized courts designed to divert individuals with mental illnesses away from incarceration and into treatment programs. Studies have shown that participants in these programs are less likely to reoffend, saving taxpayer dollars and improving public safety. Another key initiative is increasing funding for community mental health services. In many parts of the United States, mental health facilities are overburdened and underfunded, leaving countless individuals without access to care. And there are organizations that advocate for policies that prioritize mental health funding at both state and federal levels, but progress is slow. In public education, it also plays a role. Stigma remains one of the biggest barriers to seeking treatment. Nobody wants to have a problem. Campaigns to normalize mental health care and educate the public about its importance can help bridge this gap. After all, mental health is just as important as physical health, yet it's often treated as an afterthought. As we reflect on the case of Matthew Muller, it's clear that there are no easy answers, but there are steps we can take to prevent similar tragedies. It starts with recognizing that mental illness isn't a moral failing. It's a medical condition, like any other, and it requires compassion, understanding, and action. And for victims like Denise and Aaron, it's about ensuring that the system learns from its mistakes, so no one else has to endure what they did. The case of Matthew Muller, it's a haunting reminder of the complexities of mental health in the criminal justice system. This is a story of a man whose untreated illness led to devastating consequences, and not just for himself, but for everyone caught in his path. For Denise and Aaron, it was a nightmare that extended far beyond the night of the kidnapping. They were victims not only of a calculated crime, but also of a system that failed to believe them, a system they thought would protect them. And then there's Matthew Muller himself, a man of extraordinary potential. Remember what he accomplished, but a man whose brilliance was overshadowed by the darkness of his own mind. His story raises uncomfortable but absolutely necessary questions, because we're always asking, how do you balance accountability with compassion in cases like this? Well, we need to look at it long enough to try to even figure it out, but so oftentimes this question hurts our brains and we look away. How do we ensure that victims receive justice while addressing the root causes of crimes like this? And perhaps most importantly, how do we prevent these tragedies from happening in the first place? We have psychologists and psychiatrists going to school for years because of the respect for how important it is to understand the mind, yet we can't find anyone to help these people. I mean, there are no easy answers, but what is clear is that the status quo, well, that's not working. The intersection of mental health and crime, it's a space that demands more attention, more resources, and more humanity. It's not just about preventing the next Matthew Muller. It's about creating a society where mental health is prioritized and where the systems in place protect everyone, not just the fortunate few. Thank you for joining me in True Crime, the Court of Public Opinion. This case reminds us that that line between madness and malice is often razor thin, but it is one we must navigate with care. Stay safe out there, guys. Ask the difficult questions and always dig for the truth. And until next time, this is Alexis Knight.